Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, it's an honour to be here to address this conference, and greetings to our IFAA members worldwide who will be looking at this at some stage. The purpose of my talk this afternoon is to discuss some more practical implications of Brexit. As you can tell, I'm an Irishman, so therefore I'm currently President of the Chartered Institute of Loss Adjusters, member of the IFAA. And from an Irishman's perspective, we look at it slightly differently. And also, it is much more in the currency of discussion in the Republic of Ireland, I think, than it is here, because in Ireland, this is a big deal. In fact, in Ireland, the common view is that it's quite a disaster because of our reliance on the trading relationships between UK and Ireland. If they get damaged, Ireland and the Irish economy will hurt. And having just recovered from a very bad recession, we don't really want to go back to another one. So some of the insights and learnings that we've had, I steered our own business through that recession. So there are some ideas I would like to share with you, and what I would consider to be the makings of a Brexit toolkit that might be of some use and application. What I'd like to achieve today is to maybe paint a picture of the economic backdrop and how that can be so important, more than people might initially think. Secondly, I'd like to point out what I think adjusters should look out for. And thirdly, finally, what are the key response components? That is a Brexit toolkit, or at least a first version of one. And what we want to do is to try together here today is to start a discussion, one that isn't or hasn't been had until now, and one that we hope will gather some pace from now on. So in many ways, we're sticking our necks out a little bit before many wish to, but that's a good thing. If we aren't industry leaders, then we shouldn't be here. So where does our institute, CILA, stand? Well, first of all, we're a members institute. We're not a trade body, so we don't have, if you like, a mandate, an advocacy mandate. That shouldn't stop us though, because individual members and firms, they will make their own plans. And just because we don't see those plans, that doesn't mean that those plans don't exist. I do suspect those plans don't actually exist, but I don't know for sure. So therefore, CILA does not have what we call coordinational jurisdiction. In other words, we're not mustering and marshalling CILA members and CILA firms into a particular Brexit response. But in delivering on our mandate to our members, we believe that we should start the conversations, and this is a perfect platform to share some of those ideas with our colleagues worldwide. We all need to protect our members' interests, and part of protection of members' interests is to tell them what to watch out for. Here are some aids, here is some information, and so on. And of course, as an institute, we do have access to many of the power brokers. The extent to which those power brokers listen to us and take on board what we say remains to be seen. So many people in the room here and watching will have a place in some shape or form at the table, sooner or later. And when you look at Brexit, we like to analyse it under one of three headings, and many people talk about Brexit under one of three headings. We think there are three, and there are three very distinct headings to be addressed: economics, accreditation, and/or recognition. On the economic front, the economic backdrop is critical. Right now, we're in a period of global growth, but as you can see in the past week alone, there is some talk about interest rate rises in the US. You have bond yields coming under question and coming under pressure. US growth is still reasonable, and of course the rest of the world has not yet caught a cold, but only a fool would say that the environment isn't quite volatile at the moment. Interest rates are threatening to push upwards. CapEx is being put under pressure and questioned, in some cases mothballed, and consumer sentiment is definitely in question. Are people reaching for their wallets, or putting away money to either pay down debt or not commit because they don't know what the long-term outlook will be? In Ireland at the moment, for example, we have historically low interest rates, as many countries around the world currently have. But the problem is that most people borrow, if you like, to capacity. So if those interest rates pop up by 1 or 2 or 3%, you can get people getting into difficulty very, very fast. And again, because we came through a recession in Ireland, a lot of people got very badly hurt with the aftermath of that. So therefore, people are being a little bit more cautious. Will that stop them making the same mistakes? I have my doubts. For example, in the Australian world, the mining sector, demand seems still to be growing. We see merger and acquisition activity there. The Chinese economy is picking up again. But how long will that last? And I'll come back to the Chinese economy in a moment. Throughout Europe, to speak of Europe for a moment, we have a rejection of the centrist or mainstream, almost. You look at the new movement with Macron in France. You look at the far right in Germany, how much power they now have. Look at the compromises Angela Merkel had to make for her government in the last week. Look at what nearly happened in Austria. You've got, extremism popping up all over the place, and if you like, the crushing maybe of the democratic voice in many parts of the world. You look at the USA, well, is that a rush to the right? Is that a rush to the left? Or is that just a rush with what people believe are or is the unheard voice and is now being heard again? The truth of the matter is, time will only tell. And of course, you have politicians claiming credit for all sorts of things. Trump is now claiming credit for the US economy growing again. Others argue those are the seeds that Barack Obama put in place before he left office. So who knows? Italy this year, elections and so on, what will that bring? And of course, the terrorism threat. And as an Irishman who grew up on the border, I certainly have more than a passing acquaintance with what that means and the damage that can do to an economy at many levels. Confidence, inward investment, but the one that people don't often count on is that the budget is spent on security, not on promoting businesses, promoting training and so on. And Northern Ireland is a shining example of that. Protectionism popping up all over the place, tariffs being threatened or imposed. And you saw what the US had to say on the international or worldwide trade deals, what they're going to do or what they're not going to do. In truth, what they will do in the end might be entirely different, but at least the threats are there. And with threats come uncertainty and risk and lack of confidence. In my home country today, we are in recovery mode, or at least so the statistics say. But there are challenges around services and capital investment. The country was starved of resources and money to invest for many, many years during the crash, and therefore we're seeing the fallout of that today with a lot of poor consumer sentiment around the health services that we're delivering, social services that we're delivering and so on. And of course that plays into the radicalisation game as well, because you have populists popping up with popular promises that, first of all, because they're not in government, they don't have to deliver on those and they can promise anything. But it does put pressure then on governments and our government to try and keep the show on the road and try and plot a way to recovery. So far, to be fair, the government has managed to stay the course. So far, to be fair. There is a massive concern over Brexit in our country. The border, hard or soft border. I grew up 20 metres from the border. The border actually splits my village in two between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. The river behind our backyard is the border. So I know what it was like when there were customs posts and when there were road closures and all the rest of it. And my brother has a family business in our home village, and if there was a hard border tomorrow morning or tariffs, 40% of his business would disappear. So that's a big deal to us. GDP and investment, exports, they're all up. But there is pressure to spend any gains that we're making, because a lot of wages were frozen or cut in the recession. So you have a lot of people seeing an upturn in sales, and now there's a demand, can we have some of that please? But here's an interesting one for the UK. New car sales in Ireland are down. For 2018, new car sales in Ireland will be exactly matched by imports of second-hand cars from the UK to Ireland, all because of sterling and how the exchange rate is now playing out at the moment. Just a little anecdote, for example, this week's press is projecting that. We're at almost full employment, 6%. So what's at stake? We talked this morning, it was brought out, the Article 50. But just a little anecdote, it's not meant to be a sub-point, it's meant to be an independent point. Agriculture was mentioned this morning. Everybody seems to talk about agriculture. In fact, I think that agriculture gets talked far more than financial services, and I worry about that because it's driven by a well-organised, vociferous agricultural lobby, and fair play to them, they managed to do it. But where's our lobby, and what are they doing? For example, 37% of Irish food and drink exports are to the UK, but over 70% of pre-prepared food exports are to the UK. So therefore, the food sector is one sector, for example, that's going to get hurt. It was mentioned in another presentation this morning. So how will financial services respond or reposition or even relocate? And what adjuster response is needed? The adjuster response, well, we think that financial services, if you were to go by press coverage, is as an industry getting less attention than agriculture. So in other words, we think that the response is sectoral and it's a function of the power of that lobby and the access of that lobby to the corridors of power. So the way we see it, it's not been led by our political leaders, it's been led by sectors and how good they are at getting their voice heard. And surely there's a lesson in that for us. My view is that London as a key financial hub will still be one. The skill sets are still there. The London market services companies and countries all over the world. It just doesn't depend on Europe. In fact, a relatively small percentage of it depends on Europe. An important percentage, but a relatively small percentage. So will the world stop spinning as far as the London market is concerned? Frankly, I don't think so. There is evidence that hubs can relocate into Europe, Lloyds, Barclays, etc. However, what does that mean, relocate into Europe? There was talk this morning, not just a brass plate, but from my discussions with regulators, I've heard them say, well, we're going to even look behind the brass plate and the claims departments and the underwriting departments that go into Europe. They're going to look at what capital is backing them. In other words, how much of the premium income will stay with that entity in Europe, how much of it will stay back at home in the UK, and they're going to use that as a measure of what commitment, real commitment there is. So I do wonder, is there an element of regulatory arbitrage going on that, for example, Ireland didn't manage to secure some of these? Why not? No one seems to be publishing. Yes, you get the press releases about the relocation, but what you don't get is, why did they not pick somewhere else? Why did they not pick Ireland, for example? So my point is this. We spent the last decade or so removing branch networks to be mobile, nimble, efficient adjusters and financial services industry players. Are we now reverting to a version of a repositioning of a branch network just to get around the regulatory borders, perhaps? We have passporting and mutual recognition of qualifications concerns. We can't get answers as to what this is going to mean. Now, somebody might come out and say, we will recognise and therefore it's all fine. But right now, unless somebody knows, because we don't, no one has given any such commitment. Why? Because that will be dealt with as part of the general negotiations, but it's not done at the moment. So therefore, where will we stand? So UK adjusters, will they be able to work in Europe? And somebody said to me recently, but we have a branch in Europe already, we will be fine. Well, that's just not how it works in practice, particularly in the major loss front. Major loss adjusters travel because of the quality that they bring and the skill sets they bring to bear. It's no good saying that my colleague in Paris will deal with this loss instead of me if the client wants me or another colleague to deal with it, as we've been doing so for the past 20 years with this particular client. So it's not good enough to say, we all know that, it's not good enough to say my office in Paris or my office in Bonn will deal with you instead of our office in London or Dublin or wherever. So therefore, how can we stay mobile? And it was covered this morning by Mamoun that adjusters are very versatile in working all over the road and getting in and out of countries. I agree, we are, with one qualification. We are very good at what I'd call overcoming logistical obstacles. But the one thing that will stop an adjuster in his tracks or her tracks is this: you don't have a permit to come in here. We will stop dead in our tracks. We won't get in. So we hope it never comes to that. And some people say, but this will all get sorted. Well, for an industry that makes its money from analysing risk, from an industry that devises business continuity plans, that devises disaster recovery plans, do you really think it's good enough for that industry to say it'll be all right on the day? I don't think so. I don't think so at all. And furthermore, some people say it can never be that bad. Look what happened to the millennium bug. It didn't happen. Well, wait a minute. It didn't happen. Why? Was that because of the preparation? Was that because of all the scenario testing? Was that because of all the alterations to the policy wordings that last until this day? Why did it not happen? Did it not happen because of the preparation and work that was done? Or did it not happen because it was an entire damp squib? And there are differing views on that. But I put it to you, including my own business at the time, all the preparation we did for the millennium bug forced us to look at our business in a particular way that we never had looked at it before. So is that not a good thing? And I apply the same logic to this challenge. It may not happen, but as someone who makes their living from the risk industry, I don't think it's good enough to stand back and see, will it or won't it? Because it's like going into court. We're guaranteed that 50% of the audience is going to be right and the other 50 is going to be wrong. So the data protection and regulatory frameworks, there are equivalence standards to be met. And of course, our hope is that those equivalence standards will be recognised. Why do I think that and why do I hope that? Well, if you actually look at the authors of many of the EU regulations that we have, who were the best and most efficient at drawing up the most thorough, proper regulations that withstood many a challenge? The UK. They were the authors of many of them. They had the major input into many of the regulations. So they sat at the table and wrote some of the best regulations there are. So is that going to disappear just because of Brexit? I don't think so. The only question is, will they be recognised under the equivalence agreements and arrangements? So where exactly does the adjuster piece fit in? This morning we looked at the risk framework, approach to risk at a macro level. I want to look at it, well, if you're sitting in an adjuster's office, what does it mean for you? First of all, to put it in context, there are 4 pillars to be watched: goods, services, people and capital. The services are obvious, and when I say obvious, the movement of services, it's what we do. We move around providing our service. But however, just look beyond that to the capital contraction. If there is capital contraction and capital can't move, what will that do to the landscape? For example, when the recession hit us in Ireland, without losing market share, about half our business disappeared. But it didn't disappear for 2 years. It took 2 years following the bang that hit everyone else before our industry got hit. In other words, there was a timing delay between the exit of capital and investment. People stopped buying things, selling things, moving things, and so on. And it was 2 years before that filtered through into a drop in claims frequencies. What I can't tell you, and we're still plotting it, it's on the way back up again in Ireland. Is it 2 years delay on the way up? No one knows that yet because it's never happened before. And by the same token, no one knows what the delay, if any, will be if there is a hard Brexit, whatever a hard Brexit means. For example, our qualifications are benchmarked under the UK system to level 7, which is a master's level currently. CILA has FAA and IFAA membership. I'm the president and I'm an Irishman, and Malcolm Hyde, our CEO, is the next FAA president. So we intend to have a foot at the European discussion table one way or the other. And I can assure you, if we need to open up a CILA office in Dublin, I'll have one open up in about 5 hours to make sure that we comply if we need to. So what should we be doing? The question is, who is we? So this is what I would call a Brexit toolkit. In other words, if an industry or an organisation was serious about addressing this, these are the things I would cite as being evidence that you're serious about it. And if you don't do some or all of these things, then the question is, are you really serious? Do you really think this is worth paying attention to? The first thing is, and again, these are points that were not covered this morning, we try not to overlap with each other. Who is in charge of addressing this risk in an institute, company, a sector, an organisation? What are the risks? And again, they were covered this morning, so I won't go into them. What are the opportunities? For example, the UK second-hand car export market is very happy with themselves at the moment with the cars that they're pushing into Ireland and intend to for the coming year. Everyone is thinking about overseas markets, but what about the home market where 85% of our adjusting work is done? The home UK market, I mean. So is there an economic slowdown as a possibility? Because in Ireland, when there was an economic slowdown, as I said, 2 years later, everybody suffered. And when everybody suffered, claims frequencies fell dramatically. So that could have an impact on the day job and on the bread and butter. So when people are worried about whether they can work in France, they might need to be more worried about whether there is work for them to do down the road if it affects the economy of the UK. So there's also likely to be a further admin and compliance burden. For example, over the past 10 years, compliance on our industry, they say, is a burden of somewhere between 10 and 20%, depending on which part of the industry you work in. In other words, does anyone really think that any version of Brexit, no matter what its hue, will not have some form of additional compliance burden? 1%, 2%, 3%? What would 1%, 2% or 3% of your bottom line today do to our businesses? It wouldn't be good for it, I respectfully suggest. So who's going to absorb it? Do we really think, as service providers and at the end of the supply chain, that the people that employ us are going to say, don't worry about it, just send me the extra bill? Unless they've changed, that's not going to happen. So if you're looking at Brexit, have you reviewed the supplier base? Where are your suppliers? Where are they located? Is there cross-border? Is there a cross-border angle? Is it diverse? Is it clustered? Is there concentration of risk? And a very simple practical point as an accountant, can the systems and software handle currency and tax variances? I mean, some people say, of course they can. You just program it. That's all very fine. You can program it on a monthly, quarterly or annual basis. Are you going to program it on a daily or weekly basis? And if you don't, what's the cost to your business or the currency risk to your business? Our clients, we're trying to establish what are they doing. Have we talked to them? Is this on any review agenda at the moment? Are they making contingency plans? And do we know, not as a matter of opinion, as a matter of fact, as suppliers, are we on those plans? Do we form part of them? I suspect that if we haven't been consulted and told we are, I can only assume that we're not, or they've made certain assumptions that we don't even know about. So is there any business process reorg required? Because have you got different processes pre and post? Even to build in the compliance piece, even to build in the administration piece. That requires process change, no matter how small. And are there any service changes required? Are there budgetary implications? Depending on your markets, what's it going to do to your budgets? Your sales budgets, your expenses budgets, your marketing budgets? And of course, as we said before, are there any potential opportunities? Our financial and people headings. What about our currency and cash flows? Again, this was touched on earlier this morning. If you have money tied up in customs clearance at the borders, what does it do to your working capital, apart from the currency? What about your bank covenants? Are they affected? So will there be increased volatility? At the moment there is. Will it continue post-Brexit? Then we talked about this morning on restrictions on the movement of skilled people. Do we have the people and skills we need for the next 5 years? So in terms of talent planning and talent management, what will we need in 2, 3, 5 years' time? So are our talent development, talent management plans, are they affected in any way? And what are we going to do about it? Does that mean we have to alter the training plans then, so, or not? So to close, my question to everybody is, have you thought about this at an operational, granular level? Because this is so important to us that we need to begin the conversation, we need to lead the conversation, and if other industry leaders aren't leading it, I respectfully suggest we should. Thank you.